63%, 85%, 90%. Now those percentages can mean anything, and they're pretty big too. Perhaps you have a positive correlation with one of them. Like if you get an 85% on a test you thought you were going to fail, or a 90% on one that you studied for. Unfortunately, these percentages are not so positive. According to a 2019 study from the United States Department of Health and Human Services, 63% of youth suicides occur in fatherless homes. In an ongoing study from the Texas Department of Corrections, 85% incarcerated youths came from fatherless homes. And in an America First Policy Institute article released in 2022, the statistic that 90% of homeless and runaway youths come from fatherless homes was presented. Although these statistics may be daunting, they are not set in stone. Today I will be using myself to relay that message. Why? Well, I have something in common with all of these percentages. I too came from a fatherless home. Like most boys my age, I enjoy playing video games, going to the gym, and hanging out with friends. In fact, the more you get to know me, the more you'll find out that my likes and interests are pretty normal for a teenage boy. I enjoy seeing action movies, watching sports, and outings like paintball. Again, to reiterate, average interests of teenage boys. Except, for all 18 years of my life, I have been raised by a single mother. How can someone who has been raised by a single mom be so conformative to society's standards of what constitutes a man? How am I so shockingly normal? Well, the answer to that is simple. Although I can attribute myself as a whole to the teachings and lessons of my mother, I can also attribute my now very present masculinity to the teachings of my grandfather, my male role model. When there's only one female parent, it is important to have a role model of a different gender. In a society that has deemed masculinity as toxic, it has become crucial now more than ever for a young man to have a proper male role model so that we can remove this negative stigma. So what is toxic masculinity? Toxic masculinity is when a male acts in a way that perpetuates aggression, domination, or closed-mindedness. So where did such a thing come from? Well, in the 1980s, toxic masculinity had emerged or was popularized with the mythopoetic men's movement. This is where many men adopted militarized and authoritarian mindsets. But the truth of the matter is that this had been a practice stemming long before the 1980s due to society's ancient values and structures being predominantly patriarchal. So this is where full attention and focus is important. I cannot stress enough the importance of a positive male role model because the truth of the matter is that any man can teach a young man toxic masculinity, but only a positive male role model can teach a young man how to be a good one. So who can qualify as a positive male role model? A positive male role model can be anyone ranging from an older brother, family member, to a teacher or mentor of some sort. I would say that usually you will find that they are older, experienced, and most importantly, interested in your growth. So let's get technical. What is a role model? According to the Oxford Dictionary, a role model is a person looked up to by others as an example. But is one role model enough? The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry states that, quote, children look up to a variety of role models to help shape how they behave in school, relationships, or when making difficult decisions. According to the Single Mother Guide, roughly 86% of single-parent households are single mothers. As you can tell from my introduction, I was raised by a member of that 86%. Though many may see my situation as a disadvantage or a hardship, I see it as a unique experience that led me to develop a strong bond with my mother and all those who aided in my upbringing. And I would like to acknowledge my mother as my primary role model. She has been a symbol of strength and perseverance in my life and has taught me lessons that I will hold with me for the rest of my days. She has also given me a unique insight into topics that are oftentimes overlooked, such as how to treat a lady, the importance of being a gentleman, and why being a good man is an important responsibility. Essentially, her influence in my life, along with my grandfather's, has benefited me greatly due to the fact that I've been allowed to learn from experienced adults of both genders. This has allowed me to experience the best of both worlds. According to firstThingsFirst.org, in an article by Julie Baumgartner, male role models encourage healthy risk-taking, challenge, as well as embracing masculinity both mentally and physically. But it goes much further than that. While growing up, my mother would always give me lessons and teachings regarding how to treat others properly. With my grandfather, I understood that he was teaching me the why. Why I, as a young man, must practice proper etiquette. Why I, as a young man, must learn to make logical decisions more often as opposed to passionate and potentially reckless ones. Why I, as a young man, must strive to become the best version of myself to one day raise and protect a family of my own. The sad truth is that the very energy that is necessary for this type of growth has been demonized. According to the Institute for Family Studies, young men feel as if society is not investing in their energy. Therefore, they are choosing not to invest their energy back into society. Fatherlessness has remained a growing issue and is more prevalent now than ever. According to the 2022 U.S. Census Bureau, 80% of single-family households are headed by single mothers, and 4 out of 10 million children are raised without fathers. To give another percentage, according to the National Center for Education Statistics, roughly 76% of teachers are female. Okay, that's cool, so what's my point? Well, my point is that there are young men that are going from predominantly female households to spend the day in predominantly female-led learning environments back to a female-dominated household. This means that most young men receive a disproportionate amount of guidance from members of the opposite sex who may not fully understand what they're going through mentally, physically, and hormonally. So when a young man acts in a normal teenage manner, he might be seen as abnormal to an adult of the opposite sex. This means that more often than not, young men are blamed and labeled as immature or erratic, when in reality their behavior is normal. But these labels affect the mentality of these young men, which forces young men to succumb to the labels and adopt those labels as defining personality traits, because their current role model said so. However, females optimize brain connections earlier, which leads to a hastened emotional maturity in comparison to males, according to a Newcastle University study. So essentially, a majority of the time, female peers cannot relate to or understand why young boys act different due to this difference in neurological maturing, which leads to my main point that male role models are beneficial for guidance, but their crucial purpose is to allow young men to become comfortable with themselves and let them know that they belong. In the famous words of early 20th century British philosopher James Allen, he who would accomplish little must sacrifice little. He who would achieve much must sacrifice much. He who would attain highly must sacrifice greatly. Allen's words exemplify the message that young men live up to the expectations that are bestowed upon them. If little is expected from them, they will aim for and accomplish little. If they are held to a higher standard by an older member of their gender whom they respect, then they will work harder to live up to those higher standards. In the pursuit of these accomplishments, failure is inevitable. However, the beauty of failure in this situation is to teach young men that we do not lose, we learn. And when we learn, we grow. In my experience, I found that a positive male role model is someone who is the best of both worlds. They are empathetic, caring, compassionate, and strong, driven, and protective when need be. Learning from people with varied qualities allows us to become well-rounded and prepared for the various obstacles that we will have to confront in life. I'll revert to the example of my grandfather. Growing up, I always remembered associating my grandfather with different events. If I fell off my bike and scraped my knee, I would go to my grandmother for comfort to make me feel better, and to my grandfather for reassurance to make me feel strong and prepare myself to ride the bike again. This is not to say that my grandfather isn't caring and that my grandmother doesn't motivate me, but there are different outputs and feelings that are derived from behaviors associated with different genders. According to a study run by psychologist Tara M. Chaplin, which was featured in the National Library of Medicine in 2015, women show and express greater emotions than men. The idea is that we essentially experience similar emotions, but we innately have different responses. Many have this idea that a man needs to be fearless, never cry, and never show emotion, when that is simply not the case. By putting on a front like that, you only put false expectations and realities into the heads of young men. From my experience, I was most inspired when I witnessed that despite being fearful, my grandfather carried on. Despite being tired, he would maintain productivity. And despite being unsure of himself, he would still ensure that any advice he gave was the best he could give. I've been fortunate enough to have a role model like my grandfather, whom I've admired for all of my life. He's never ceased to lead by example, and I can proudly state that he is the type of man I aspire to be. I believe that for someone to have such a tremendous impact on another person that they strive to be like them is one of the greatest aspects of being a human. Or more specifically, one of the greatest aspects of being a young man in training, as I like to call it. With that being said, I cannot stress enough the importance of how crucial it is that tomorrow's men are given the foundation to be great and inspirational. The best way to go about doing this is to seek out a role model. I encourage you to step out of your comfort zone and allow yourself to be vulnerable and make it known that you are seeking guidance and mentorship. If you have an older brother you're close with, start turning to them when you are unsure about personal life decisions. Perhaps there's a teacher at your school who you have a good bond with, or maybe even your neighbor next door can be an adequate mentor. Most importantly, when all is said and done, I encourage you to work towards becoming the mentor you never had so that your kids or the next generation of young men don't have to struggle like you did. Thank you.